The evening was like any other at the diner, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The noise of clinking plates, the sizzling sound from the grill, and the hum of soft chatter seemed more distant than usual, as though the world outside had paused. The fluorescent lights flickered above her, casting a harsh, sterile glow over the room, and her feet ached after another 12-hour shift. But she couldn't stop now. Her mother's medical bills loomed, large in her thoughts, and her rent was due next week. Every shift was a tightrope walk, balancing her work with the demands of her life outside the diner, a life that always seemed to demand more than she had to give. Claire wiped her hands on the edges of her apron, her movements automatic as she approached her next table. She was used to dealing with difficult customers, but tonight the tension was different. There was a restlessness in the air, something Claire couldn't quite identify. As she set down the water glasses and asked the group of regulars if they needed anything else, she noticed him, a man sitting alone in the corner booth, his eyes narrowing as he watched her. He had been quiet when she'd taken his order earlier. In the evening, his cold gaze had lingered on her for just a second too long, a look that unsettled her. But she had written it off as just another customer who thought they were entitled to more than a polite smile. His presence in the corner felt off, like an intrusion into the rhythm of her routine. Something about the way he sat, leaning forward, slightly, watching her every move, made her skin prickle. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. She had learned long ago that being a waitress wasn't about feeling comfortable. It was about surviving the shift, and that meant keeping her focus on the job at hand. She delivered a coffee to an elderly woman in the booth near the back, smiling as she exchanged pleasantries. But the man in the corner remained in her peripheral vision. As she moved back to the counter, she overheard him muttering under his breath, though she couldn't make out the words. Something about the way his jaw was set made her uneasy, and she quickly turned away, not wanting to let her nerves show. The minutes dragged on, and the diner's usual chaos began to grow. But her mind kept drifting back to him. Was he watching her? His eyes seemed to follow her whenever she passed by, not with the usual disinterest of a customer waiting for their meal, but with a sharpness that made her feel like an object under scrutiny. It wasn't until she passed by his table again, refilling his coffee, that she caught a glimpse of something strange. A small, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth, as if he was holding back something, some kind of judgment. Then came the moment that would change everything. Claire's eyes flicked to the edge of his table as she noticed a flash of light. His wallet had fallen out of his coat pocket and onto the floor. Claire's instinct kicked in immediately. She bent down to pick it up, making sure not to touch anything inside it, then placed it back on the table, careful not to disturb the man's personal belongings. She smiled politely, hoping to diffuse any awkwardness, but he didn't smile back. Instead, his face turned rigid, his expression hardening as he gripped the wallet, his fingers turning white around it. "You took it," he muttered, his voice low, barely above a whisper. Taken aback, Claire blinked, her heart starting to race. "I'm sorry, what?" she stammered, confused. "You took my money," he said, louder now, his eyes glaring at her. "I had cash in there and now it's gone. You were the only one around my table." Claire's stomach lurched. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It didn't make sense. Her mind raced to explain it, but the words got caught in her throat. Her hands began to shake as her mind struggled to comprehend the accusation. This wasn't happening. She was a hard-working woman with a mother who needed her, who depended on her. The thought of being accused of theft, something so far removed from the truth, was unthinkable. "I didn't take anything," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to calm herself. "I just picked up your wallet, I swear." But he wasn't listening. His gaze was icy, filled with fury and suspicion. "You think I'm stupid?" he spat. "I saw you. Don't lie to me." The harshness of his words echoed in her chest, like a slap. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. He was accusing her deliberately. She had seen it happen before. Customers who had a chip on their shoulder, who looked for someone to blame when things went wrong. But this felt different. The man's anger wasn't born of frustration. It was something darker, something more personal. Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't think. She could only feel the weight of his accusation pressing against her chest, the sudden knowledge that her reputation, her integrity, was being questioned by a complete stranger. But before she could say anything else, the manager, Peter, appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, his usual calm demeanor replaced by unease. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between Claire and the man. "She stole from—" "Me?" the man snapped, pointing accusingly at Claire. "I demand she be fired." Peter's eyes widened. He had known Claire for a while, and although he wasn't particularly close to her, he had always seen her as reliable, hard-working, even if a little too eager to please. But now, faced with the accusation, he didn't know what to believe. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," Peter said, looking at Claire, his voice tight with a mix of discomfort and authority. Claire nodded, her face flushed, with a mix of anger and fear. As she followed Peter to the back of the diner, her thoughts were scattered, her mind racing. She had always prided herself on being trustworthy, but now everything felt like it was slipping out of her grasp. The foundation of her life, her work, her sense of self, was being questioned in front of everyone. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? In the back room, Peter gestured for Claire to sit. She complied, though her hands shook as she tucked them into her lap. Her heart raced, and her thoughts spun in circles. Was this really happening? What had she done wrong? Claire's pulse raced as she sat in the back room, her hands trembling as they rested in her lap. The walls seemed to close in on her, the sterile fluorescent lighting buzzing overhead. She had never felt so small, so vulnerable. The weight of the man's accusation, she stole from him, pressed heavily against her chest. Everything she had worked for, every hour spent juggling shifts and making sacrifices for her family, suddenly felt like it could unravel in an instant. Peter stood across from her, silent, his eyes avoiding hers. He wasn't a bad person, Claire knew that. He was just doing his job. But the discomfort in his stance, his hesitation, only made her more aware of the precariousness of her situation. In a world where mistakes were rarely forgiven, and first impressions often determined everything, Claire's reputation was on the line. "I don't know what's happening, Peter," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. "I swear, I didn't take anything. I just picked up his wallet. That's it." Peter rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. His eyes flicked toward the door, where the customer, still sitting in the dining area, waited. His posture was rigid, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes still fixed on the entrance as if waiting for her to be dragged out of the diner in shame. The thought of facing him again made Claire's stomach churn, but she forced herself to speak. "Peter, please, you know me. I wouldn't do this. I have to take care of my mom. I can't afford to mess things up." Her voice cracked with the weight of her words. The simple truth she had been living with for so long. Her mother's illness, the endless bills, the struggle to maintain some semblance of normalcy, felt like it had been laid bare. Claire was always careful, always cautious. Everything she did was with purpose. She didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. Peter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the counter, staring down at the coffee cups that had been left half-filled by departing customers. His fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the counter, a sign that his mind was at war with itself. He wasn't sure what to believe. The accusation from the customer was strong, and he didn't want to lose his job by ignoring it, but at the same time, he had never seen Claire act in any way other than professionally. I don't know, Claire," Peter finally said, his voice low, filled with uncertainty. "I've worked with you for a while now. You've always been reliable. But this guy..." He gestured vaguely toward the front of the diner, where the man's angry silhouette could be seen through the door. "He's insistent, and I don't know. It just looks bad. I have to consider the possibility." The words stung more than Claire expected. It was as though Peter was saying that her years of loyalty, the long hours she had put in, the sacrifices she made for the sake of her mother, could be wiped away by a single accusation. But it was not just the accusation that hurt. It was the doubt, the suspicion that he had placed on her. It made her question the very foundation of who she was. "I know it looks bad," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "But if you think I would do something like this, after everything..." "I can't..." But she couldn't finish her sentence. The truth was, she wasn't sure what would happen next. Would Peter believe her? Would he side with the customer, who had the power to accuse her of something that could ruin her life? Everything she had worked for was on the brink of shattering, and all she could do was sit there, feeling helpless. There was a moment of silence, and then the door swung open, revealing the customer once more. His face was still red with anger, his lips pressed into a thin line. He stepped into the room without a word, standing near Peter, as though staking his claim on the situation. Claire's heart skipped a beat. "We need to settle this now," the man said, his voice cold and dismissive. He didn't seem to care about the inner turmoil that Claire was going through. His accusation had become his truth. "I want her fired." Peter turned to Claire, his face drawn, his lips tight as if holding back something more than just words. He couldn't make the decision for himself, it seemed. The pressure had shifted onto him, and the fear of making the wrong choice paralyzed him. Claire stood up, her legs shaking, but she forced herself to stand tall. She wasn't going to let him dictate her life, not like this. Not in a way that would break everything she had worked for. She wasn't going to let a false accusation define her. "Peter," she said firmly, her voice rising with the fire she hadn't realized she still had. "You know me. I've worked here day in and day out, always doing my best. I have nothing to hide. You want to believe him? Fine. But you need to know who I am. You've seen me, really seen me, every day. I've never once acted like this, I never will." Peter didn't meet her eyes. He couldn't. The guilt of having to even question her gnawed at him, but the weight of the customer's anger, the looming threat of losing the diner's reputation, was enough to keep him silent. The air in the room grew heavier. "I'm sorry, Claire," Peter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I have to follow protocol." At that moment, Claire realized that it wasn't just the customer she had to convince, it was herself. If she let herself crumble here, everything she had fought for would be lost. If she didn't take a stand now, she would be nothing more than a victim of circumstances beyond her control. This was her moment. This was the turning point, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. "I'll prove I didn't steal anything," she said with a new conviction in her voice, staring straight into Peter's eyes. "I'll prove that I'm innocent, even if it's the last thing I do." The words hung in the air, but inside Claire something had shifted. She wasn't going to let the story be written for her. She would write it herself. Claire's heart hammered in her chest as she stood there, waiting for Peter to make his decision. She could feel the suffocating silence in the room pressing against her, pushing her thoughts to swirl in every direction. It wasn't just the accusation that hurt. It was the sense that her life, her reputation, was now hanging by a thread, ready to snap. The hours she had spent working here, the moments she had spent scraping together a living for herself and her mother, seemed meaningless now in the face of this one moment of doubt. She was being reduced to an accusation. Peter stood stiffly near the counter, his back to her, lost in thought. Claire could see the conflict in his posture. His shoulders were tight, his movements jerky. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. She could see it in the way he kept glancing at the door, as if expecting the world outside to burst in and solve the problem for him. There was a part of Claire that wanted to scream, to make him see what this was doing to her. But instead, she remained silent, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She could feel the cold draft from the air conditioner biting at her exposed skin. But the chill had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the suffocating, invisible weight of betrayal. "I've known you for a while, Claire," Peter said, suddenly, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't think you're the type to do something like this. But this guy's been coming here for a long time. He's a regular." He paused, his eyes flicking to the door once more. "And he's insistent. What do you want me to do?" Claire clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had worked too hard for too long for someone else's accusation to tear it all down in an instant. It wasn't just about the job. It was about her dignity, her sense of self. She had always prided herself on being a woman of integrity, someone who never took shortcuts, who worked with her hands and sweat. But now, in this sterile, dimly lit room, all of that was being questioned. "I want you to believe me," Claire finally said, her voice shaking with the rawness of her emotion. "I've never stolen anything in my life. I have a mother who needs me. I can't afford to lose this job, Peter. Not now. Not after everything." Peter looked at her, his eyes softening for a brief moment, but his gaze was still unsure. He didn't know what to believe. He had seen Claire work tirelessly, going above and beyond for her customers, always with a smile. But he was also stuck, in a difficult position. The customer was demanding answers, and Claire had no way to prove her innocence. She was only one person against the accusation of a paying customer. The tension hung in the air, a suffocating presence, until Claire, couldn't stand it anymore. She stood up, her body moving on its own. The urge to act, to do something, became overwhelming. "I'll prove it," she said, the words coming out of her mouth before she even fully understood what she meant. "I'll show you that I didn't. Take anything?" Peter turned around, his face twisted in confusion. "How do you expect to do that? You can't just—" "I'll get the security footage," she interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "If you won't believe me, then I'll make sure you see what happened." For a moment, Peter said nothing. He just stared at her as if he hadn't expected such defiance, such strength, from the woman he'd known as just another waitress. The power of the accusation had changed her in a way that neither of them had anticipated. It had awakened something inside her. Something that had always been there, but had remained dormant beneath the surface. Peter hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded. "Fine. But we're going to need the footage from the cameras. I'll call the security office." Claire turned on her heel without another word, her mind already racing through the possible outcomes. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find, proof of her innocence or proof of the customer's lie. But either way, she knew she couldn't leave it up to doubt. She had to take control, even if it meant exposing herself in a way that made her feel vulnerable, exposed. As she walked toward the back office, her mind began to churn with questions. Had the customer set her up? Had she been in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was there something deeper at play here? Something she wasn't seeing? The thought that the man might have been watching her closely, possibly waiting for the right moment to accuse her, gnawed at her. But that was just speculation. Right now, she had to focus on what was in front of her, getting the footage, proving her innocence, and surviving this nightmare. The room felt colder now, the silence, stretching between her and Peter like a tightrope. She had been through so much already, her mother's illness, her struggle to make ends meet. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. This was a test of everything she had built. It wasn't just her job on the line anymore. It was her sense of who she was, her very identity. As she approached the security office, her breath caught in her throat. What if the footage didn't show what she hoped it would? What if it didn't clear her name? What if she was wrong? She shook her head, forcing the thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now. She had to stand tall, for herself, for her mother, for everything she had worked for. Claire had always known how to survive, and no matter what happened, she wasn't going to let this man, or anyone, take that from her. When she entered the security office, the technician looked up from his screen, a confused expression crossing his face as he saw Claire standing there. "Can I help you?" "I need to see the footage from the cameras," Claire said, her voice steady. "From the last few hours." The technician nodded and began to pull up the footage. Claire's stomach twisted in knots. This was it, the moment of truth. Whatever happened next would define her, would either shatter her or rebuild her. The footage flickered onto the screen, and Claire leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the tiny, grainy images. The truth was about to reveal itself. And in that moment, she felt both the weight of the world and the strength of a woman who was determined to fight for her dignity. The glow of the security monitors flickered in the dim office, casting long shadows across Claire's face. Her heart raced as she stared at the grainy footage, her breath shallow, every second stretching longer than the last. she hadn't expected it to be so difficult to watch the video. After all, she knew what had happened. But seeing the cold, silent images of herself moving around the diner, her every step scrutinized under the camera's watchful eye, made her feel like a stranger in her own life. The technician's fingers danced over the keyboard, clicking through the footage, rewinding and pausing at intervals. Claire could feel the weight of each frame, the pressure of her own image being examined, dissected. This wasn't just about proving she hadn't stolen. It was about her very identity, her integrity. This footage was a record of the truth, or the lack of it, and it terrified her. The room felt smaller with every passing second, the hum of the monitors growing louder in her ears. But then, something happened that she hadn't expected. "Wait," the technician muttered, his voice sharp, drawing Claire's attention. His eyes widened as he leaned closer to the screen, his fingers hovering over the mouse. Claire's breath caught in her throat. "What is it?" The technician didn't respond immediately, his brow furrowed in concentration. He clicked on a specific segment of the footage, right around the moment she'd leaned down to pick up the man's wallet. Claire could see herself clearly in that frame, bending down, moving the wallet carefully back onto the table. But there was something else, something that hadn't caught her attention before. Another figure, a shadow, flashed past her, moving swiftly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Claire leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. The technician paused the footage, his finger resting over the mouse. "I don't know. It looks like someone else was at the table at the same time you were, just before you moved away." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Another person? She hadn't noticed anyone else near the table, especially not someone who could have taken the money. But now, as she looked closely, she could see it. The figure was small, quick, almost invisible in the background. It was a blur of motion, but it was undeniably there. The technician fast-forwarded the footage, his eyes scanning the screen. As it played out, Claire saw the figure again, this time more clearly. A woman, dressed in a dark coat, her face hidden in the shadows, slipped into view at the edge of the table, moving in the direction of the customer's wallet. She didn't seem to interact with Claire, but her hand, quick and deft, reached for something near the edge of the table. Claire's stomach lurched. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Someone had been lurking. Someone had been watching. It wasn't her. The realization hit Claire like a tidal wave, pushing her breath out of her chest. The wallet had never been her responsibility, not the way she had thought. This isn't me," Claire whispered, barely able to process the new revelation. "Someone else took it." The technician, still transfixed by the screen, began to rewind the footage again. "It looks like she slipped away just before you picked it up. You were completely focused on returning the wallet. You didn't even notice." Claire's mind raced. Who was this woman? Why hadn't she noticed her before? The customer's accusation, the heavy weight of his angry stare, had completely clouded her vision. She had been so certain of her own innocence that she hadn't even considered the possibility that someone else could be involved. The woman, who had remained hidden in the background, had taken advantage of that. The implications were staggering. If this woman was responsible, it meant the customer's outburst, his insistence on Claire's guilt, had been entirely misplaced. But it also raised new questions. Why hadn't he mentioned another figure? Why had he immediately zeroed in on her? "Is there more footage of her?" Claire asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and urgency. "Do we know who she is?" The technician paused, looking over the video feed. "I'm not sure. She looks like she was in and out of the frame quickly, but I can try to find other angles." Claire's thoughts spun wildly. The situation had gone from a simple accusation to something much darker. Was this woman connected to the customer? Had they been working together? The more Claire thought about it, the more unsettling the scenario became. She had never seen this woman before, and yet she had been there, watching, waiting. The technician clicked through a few more frames, his fingers moving with greater speed now. Then suddenly, he stopped. He rewound the footage once more, pausing at a frame that revealed something Claire had missed the first time, an odd detail. The woman's hand, reaching toward the wallet, had brushed against something else on the table. A small, folded piece of paper. The technician froze, staring at the screen. "That wasn't there before," he said slowly, his voice tinged with confusion. "The paper. It wasn't there when the customer first sat down." Claire's breath caught. What was that paper? Could it have been planted? She watched as the technician zoomed in, his face tightening with concentration. "That's strange. The paper. It's almost like it was left there deliberately." Claire felt a rush of cold wash over her. "Do you think it was a setup?" The technician slowly nodded. "It's possible. Whoever took the money may have been trying to frame someone else, someone they knew would be nearby when the wallet fell. Maybe you, since you were the one closest to the table." The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the puzzle was more complicated than Claire had first imagined. The woman who had been hiding in the shadows wasn't just some random bystander. She was part of something bigger, an orchestrated plan designed to manipulate the situation in the customer's favor. But why? Just as Claire was about to voice her growing suspicions, the technician muttered, "Wait a second. I think I found something else." The screen shifted, revealing a close-up of the folded paper. Claire squinted, her heart pounding in her ears. As the camera zoomed in, the technician pointed to a faint mark on the edge of the paper. "That's a logo," he said, his voice low with disbelief. "I've seen that before. It's from a high-end store, one that has a reputation for selling stolen goods." Claire's stomach churned. This was no longer just about clearing her name. It was becoming something far more dangerous, and she was at the center of it all. The truth was more twisted than she had ever imagined, and now she had to figure out who was behind it and why they were targeting her. The seconds felt like hours as Claire stood in the dimly lit security room, her mind spinning with the implications of the discovery. The technician had just revealed the logo on the paper, and it was as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about the accusation, about the man's sudden rage, was now called into question. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't a random misunderstanding. This was a deliberate attempt to set her up. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as the technician continued to scan the footage. Her body felt heavy with the weight of the realization that her life was now entangled in something far darker than she could have ever imagined. She had always thought of herself as a survivor, someone who could weather any storm. But this felt different. The depth of the manipulation, The precision of the setup shook her to her core. Who was behind this? What did they want from her? The technician's voice broke through her thoughts. I don't know how, but someone's been setting you up. This wasn't a simple accusation. It's a full-blown scheme. Claire nodded, her breath shallow. I know. I feel it too. She turned her gaze toward the screen once again. The paper, the logo, it was all too much. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't fit into a neat picture. Instead, they were fragments of a larger, more complex puzzle that she couldn't quite solve. I need to know who's behind this, she said, her voice low but firm. I can't let this ruin me. The technician looked at her with a mix of sympathy and admiration. I'm not sure what else I can do, but maybe I can track down where that paper came from. If I can find out who the customer is connected to, if there's a link to that store or someone else, it might give you a lead. Claire nodded again, but it wasn't just the technician's help she needed. It was something deeper, something more visceral. This was no longer just about clearing her name. It was about reclaiming her power. This man, this faceless accuser, had taken so much from her already, her dignity, her peace of mind, her sense of security. But she wasn't going to let him take her life from her, not without a fight. The technician continued typing, the soft clatter of keys filling the silence, but Claire's thoughts had already turned inward. As she reflected on everything that had happened, she realized how easily she had allowed herself to become a victim of someone else's narrative. She had been so focused on the immediate fallout, the accusation, the humiliation, that she hadn't seen the bigger picture. She had always been someone who took pride in being invisible, in blending into the background. She did her job, kept her head down, and tried to do right by her mother. But this situation had forced her into the spotlight in a way she never wanted. Now she realized that she couldn't just let things unfold around her anymore. If she was going to take control of her future, she had to do something she had never done before: stand up and fight for it. The thought made her stomach churn, but at the same time, there was something empowering about it. She had been given a choice, and it wasn't one she could ignore. She could take the easy way out, let Peter handle everything, let the chips fall where they may, or she could take the reins and show the world exactly who she was. But it wasn't just about proving her innocence. It was about proving that she was more than the circumstances she had been handed. Her life had never been easy. Every day had been a struggle to balance the weight of her responsibilities, her dreams, and the reality of caring for her sick mother. But this was different. This was a test of her character, a challenge to rise above the situation and redefine herself. I need to take action, Claire said, her voice steady, the resolve in her tone unmistakable. I can't sit around waiting for someone else to fix this. The technician nodded, a subtle expression of respect in his eyes. What do you need? Claire's eyes sharpened with determination. I need to find that woman in the footage. I need to know who she is and why she's involved in this. I also need to confront that man, the customer. I won't let him think he can ruin my life with a lie. I'll track down every lead I can, even if it means I have to go through his entire life to find the truth. The technician stared at her, his hands frozen above the keyboard. You're really going to confront him? Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. I have to. I can't let him get away with this. Not when my whole future is on the line. The technician hesitated, then sighed, clearly impressed by her resolve. I'll help however I can. But be careful. This isn't just some misunderstanding. Whoever is behind this has been planning it for a while. You might be up against more than just one person. Claire's stomach tightened. The gravity of the situation was starting to sink in, but her determination only deepened. She had been fighting her entire life, against her circumstances, her fears, and the endless challenges that life had thrown at her. This was just another battle. She could handle it. She would handle it. As she left the security room and walked back into the restaurant, she felt a surge of adrenaline course through her veins. She wasn't going to be a victim anymore. The days of quietly accepting what others decided for her were over. She was going to take control, take action, and expose the truth, no matter the cost. Peter was still standing by the counter when she returned, his face drawn with worry. But Claire didn't hesitate. She walked right up to him, her eyes locked on his, her voice steady and clear. "I'm not going to let this go," she said, her tone final. "I'm going to find out who's behind this, and I'm going to clear my name. You can either help me or stay out of my way." Peter opened his mouth to speak, but Claire cut him off. "This is bigger than you or me. This is about what's right, and I won't let anyone destroy my life." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything Claire had come to realize in the past few hours. She wasn't just fighting for her job anymore. She was fighting for her dignity, for the truth, and for the life she had always wanted to build. And she wasn't going to stop until she had it all back. The day after the discovery in the security room, Claire found herself standing at a crossroads. She had always prided herself on being a survivor, on finding ways to navigate the chaos that life had thrown her way. But now, with everything she had worked for hanging in the balance, it was clear that survival alone wouldn't be enough. This wasn't just about keeping her job. This was about proving to herself and to the world that she was stronger than the forces trying to tear her down. The weight of the revelation about the woman in the footage sat heavy on Claire's chest, but it also ignited something inside her, a fire that had been dormant for too long. For the first time in years, Claire felt a sense of agency, of control over her destiny. She wasn't going to let someone else dictate the terms of her life. She was going to confront this head-on, even if it meant taking risks she wasn't entirely comfortable with. As she walked into the diner that afternoon, she was greeted by the usual bustle of activity. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of dishes, the sizzle of food on the grill, it all seemed so ordinary, so mundane. Yet for Claire, every sound felt like an echo of her inner turmoil. The faces of her coworkers, the customers coming and going, all seemed so distant now. She was no longer just a waitress trying to make ends meet. She was a woman on a mission, determined to right a wrong and uncover the truth. Peter was behind the counter when she walked in, his eyes immediately meeting hers. He opened his mouth to speak, but Claire held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not here for a conversation, Peter," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here to finish what we started. I need you to help me find out who the woman in the footage is. I need you to get the customer's information. I need to confront him." Peter's face faltered for a moment, as if he was unsure how to respond. Claire could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to help, but he was also afraid of what might happen if he got involved too deeply. The tension in the room was palpable, but Claire didn't back down. She couldn't afford to. "I know, you're nervous," she continued, her voice softer now. "But this isn't just about me. It's about what's right. This isn't just some mistake, Peter. This is a setup, and I'm not going to let it destroy me." Peter swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to the door where the customer had been sitting the night before. "I'll see what I can do," he muttered, his voice low with uncertainty. But there was a shift in his posture, a subtle change that made Claire think he was beginning to believe her. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Claire threw herself into tracking down the woman from the footage. She contacted the security technician again, asking for every detail they could extract from the cameras. She made phone calls, sent emails, and pushed for information she never would have considered pursuing just days ago. But as the hours stretched on, Claire began to realize that this wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about reclaiming her power. Around mid-afternoon, Peter came through. He handed Claire a slip of paper with the name and address of the customer who had accused her. He didn't say much, just a quiet nod, as if acknowledging the weight of what they were about to do. Claire's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment she had been working toward. With the address in hand, Claire left the diner, her footsteps quick and purposeful. She didn't know what she expected to find when she arrived at the customer's home. Part of her wanted to believe that this had all been a misunderstanding, that the man had simply been frustrated or anxious, and that he would apologize once he realized the truth. But another part of her, the part that had been betrayed by the situation, feared that she was about to face something darker, something far more calculated. The neighborhood was quiet, suburban, the kind of place that seemed untouched by the troubles of the world. But Claire knew better. No place was immune to betrayal, to the ugliness that people sometimes carried with them. She stood in front of the house for a moment, taking in the quiet, the peacefulness that felt like a lie. Then she rang the doorbell. The door opened and there he was, the man who had accused her, his face still twisted with the same anger that had marked his expression the night before. He looked older in the light of day, his eyes cold, calculating. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice gruff, his gaze narrowing. "I'm here to talk," Claire said, her voice unwavering despite the pounding of her heart. "I need to know why you did this." He scoffed, stepping back slightly as if to close the door, but Claire held her ground. "You accused me of stealing. You've ruined my life for something I didn't do. I have proof. I know you weren't alone when that wallet fell." His face hardened, and for a moment, Claire thought he might slam the door in her face. But then something shifted. His eyes darted nervously, and a flicker of hesitation crossed his features. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice tight. But the lie was there, in the way his words faltered, in the way he avoided her gaze. "I know about the woman," Claire said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I saw her in the footage. She's the one who took the money." The man's face drained of color. For a split second, Claire saw fear in his eyes, the fear of being exposed, of having his carefully constructed facade fall apart. But then he regained his composure, his expression hardening into something far more dangerous. "You don't know anything," he said, his voice cold. You'd be wise to forget about this, Claire. Some things are better left alone. Claire didn't flinch. I'm not leaving until I get the truth. Who is she? Why did you do this? For a moment, the man didn't answer. He stood there, his jaw clenched, his hands trembling at his sides. Then finally he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. She's just a means to an end. I wasn't going to let you get away with it. I couldn't risk you reporting me. Claire's mind raced. Reporting you for what? The man's gaze flickered toward the street, as if he feared someone might be listening. For the money, he muttered. For the things I've been doing. But you're not going to ruin that for me. You're not going to take away everything I've worked for. The truth hit Claire like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about a stolen wallet. This was about something far bigger. The man had been involved in something illegal, something that he was willing to sacrifice her for. And now, Claire knew, she had no choice but to expose him. Her fight for redemption had just begun, and she was going to take down everything that had been built on her suffering. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with.